Hello and welcome to the FSF Podcast. I am Tim. I am your host, and I am very excited to welcome you to today's show because not only is this a show made by nerds for nerds, but we've got a really cool nerd waiting for us in the back in the green room. Our guest today is a two-time Emmy Award winner. He's been nominated 8 different times, and in 2009, now this is a lot of words coming up, so just bear with me. He was given the Animation Writers Caucus Writing Award for Lifetime Achievement from the Writers Guild of America. I had to write that down. I had to practice that sentence. There's a lot of words in there. But you've seen his work on shows like Justice League, The Batman, Batman Beyond, the new Batman Superman Adventures, Spider-Man, Static Shock, Ben 10, and so many, many others. He's also the author of this fantastic book called Beyond the Bat. And this has been a very enjoyable read, and I encourage you all to check that out. We're going to talk about that a little bit today with our guest, Stan Berkowitz. Welcome to the show, Stan.
Thanks, Tim. Glad to be here.
Well, I am so glad that you said yes. I've been a fan of your work for a very long time. It's one of those things where over the years, where doing this show, that I've come to realize, you know, because sometimes it's unfortunate that many times the writers are sometimes the unseen faces and the unknown to that the thing that we've enjoyed our whole life, and all of a sudden you go, oh, they worked on this thing and that thing, and my kids growing up, because I was watching it for my kids. Clearly, you know, it wasn't for me; it was for my kids. We watched a lot of Batman Beyond and the Justice League, and and Spider-Man and Ben 10. I was clearly watching for them and making sure my boys had quality entertainment. But and if you believe that, I have some oceanfront property in Colorado I'd love to sell you. So, but one of the first things that we always like to start off with on our show, Stan, is we'd like to talk to our guests because, as I said in the intro, we're nerds and we love cool, nerdy things. And one of the things that nerds love best is a good origin story. So in the story of Stan Berkowitz, what got you here? What got you to the point of thinking, you know what, I'd like to be a writer for entertainment purposes?
Well, there are a lot of us, you know, when I was maybe 13, 14, making little movies. At back then, you know, in my distant youth, it was 8mm silent. You know, you couldn't do dialogue, so just, you know, silent 8mm film, and parents tended to have them so that they could make home movies with their families. But when the little kids took over, they started making their own movies, much different storylines than what the parents were doing. If you've seen The Fabelmans, which is Steven Spielberg's origin story,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of kids were doing what he was doing, you know, punching holes in the film itself to simulate gunfire, all that kind of stuff. So I was doing that. There were other kids doing it, and I remember going to a high school reunion. I guess we were in our late 30s, and I ran into one of the guys that had acted for me, you know, back when we were 14, 15. And he said, "So what are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, basically the same thing. I just never stopped doing it. Most of my other friends kind of grew up, and I didn't have to, luckily. Or perhaps I wasn't capable of it."
Well, that's fair. All right. So you said you were making 8mm movies, all these different things. You've done so much in the animation and comic book worlds. Was there a particular superhero or comic book that you looked at that you thought, man, I would love to be able to do something in this genre?
Yes and no. I was drawn to superheroes before I was so young that I don't remember the first time I saw the George Reeves Superman show. But like millions of other kids, I was watching it. I loved it. But it never occurred to me that that show was something made by people, that there were writers making it. You know, I was 3 years old, so obviously I was kind of naive as to the process of it.
Sure.
No, it never occurred to me. When I was about 8 years old, I then discovered that besides TV shows, there were these things called comic books.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember getting my dad bought them for me. I remember getting a Superboy comic. It's actually Adventure Comics and Detective Comics, so Batman and Superboy. And because I like to draw, then excuse me, I started drawing my own versions, very crude versions of the comic books I was reading. It inspired me to draw. I mean, I'd already been drawing, but so I understood at age 8 that these comic books didn't come, that they weren't just a miraculous conception, or immaculate conception. I realized that there were people who did it, and then
Mm-hmm.
at 8 I started doing it myself. The drawing never really went anywhere because within a few years I was doing the little home movies with my friends.
Okay. Do you remember what the first thing that you wrote where you said, that I might be able to do something with this?
With writing?
Yeah.
Oh, that was in college. I kind of didn't know what I wanted to major in, and they had UCLA. I sort of wound up there by accident. I lived near it. At the time I lived near UCLA, so they kind of recruited me, and but they didn't talk about a major, and they had a really good film department. They were one of the best film departments in the country, along with USC and NYU. And so I thought, well, and I'm taking, the requisites that you have to take: physics, a little bit of physics, a little bit of chemistry, stuff I wasn't really interested in. But I took a film class, and one of the assignments was to review a film called 2001, Kubrick's movie.
Oh yeah.
And it was a big, big class. I mean, it was taught inside a small movie theater. So there are a lot of people in it. And I turned my review in, and the teacher said, "Hey, uh, there were a couple of reviews that really stood out, and I'm gonna have my TA read them to the class." And I hear mine being read, and I thought, well, gee, maybe I could be a film reviewer. So I went to the college paper and started reviewing films for them, and that too led to more work in journalism. I've done a lot of journalism too.
Okay. Very
I
cool.
wish I can make this more interesting, like more dramatic, but it's just something that kind of just grew.
Yeah.
And I wasn't interested in anything else. So that, it'd be great if, I wanted to be a surgeon, and I had an accident and lost a hand or something, but none of that happened. It was just really, really straightforward stuff. Wasn't interested in anything else.
No, that's okay. Sometimes the best stories are the straight ahead stories without all the twists and turns. Sometimes twists and turns make things a little more exciting, but
I wish.
our life, as I read in your book, it doesn't. Sometimes you don't have to have one action scene after the next. Sometimes it's just good to have a story in there. So,
Well, yeah, but the stories better contain action, or else
well, absolutely.
the kids aren't, even the adults aren't going to watch.
No, if it's just straight story, you got to have some action. So yeah. And speaking of your book, like I said, this is it right here. It's called Beyond the Bat, and I do appreciate you sending me this. This was great. It's about 225 pages long, I think, somewhere in there. 227 actually. And I really enjoyed some of the chapters in here that I've been able to read. Uh, and when I first got it, the first thing I do with any book that I receive is I sit down and I look through the table of contents, look at the chapter names, and one jumped off the page at me. Well, two actually, and one made me laugh, and one made me go, "Oh, I got to read that one, see what that one's about." The one that made me laugh was chapter 7. Damn it, Hooker, she was my niece. And I was like, well, I have to find out what that's about. And that's how I found out you wrote for TJ Hooker. Uh, which I remember watching that show as a kid. And of course, again, as a kid, you don't really realize that there's people behind the scenes doing all the things. You just realize that there's actors on screen when I was a kid. And then
Were you
at some
watching?
point,
Were you watching Hooker because you'd been a fan of Shatner in Star Trek, or was this a new thing to you?
it was just a new thing to me. I
Right.
didn't have any at that age. I didn't understand that Shatner had been both Captain Kirk and now this guy.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't until a few years later, I think, that when some of the Star Trek movies began to become more popular, that I started putting two and two together after seeing Wrath of Khan and some of the other stuff, going,
Right.
oh, hey, wait a minute, I've seen that guy on TV.
Yes.
And
Okay.
kind of
Interesting.
putting things together from there. So, if you would please take a moment and tell our listeners about your book, and because we were talking about it off camera, and a couple of things that I appreciate about it, and I'll just bring this up again. But one of the things I most appreciate about it is that it's not a book that I felt I had to sit down and read cover to cover. It was one that I felt I could go through and I could pick a chapter, enjoy it, go back to the table of contents, pick a new chapter, and enjoy that one as well.
Yes.
So, if you would please,
My wife would call that a bathroom book.
a bathroom book. I think your wife is very smart.
She,
But yeah, if you would please take just a couple minutes and tell everybody about your book and where they can find it.
well, that's the easy part. Amazon.
Perfect.
Occasionally, though, I go to comic conventions. I'll be in one in Ontario, California on May 17th and 18th of 2025. And I'll have copies of the book there available. I'm usually at conventions with a booth called Heroic Fine Arts. And they sell all kinds of superhero related artwork. And most of the time, I'm with an artist named Dan Reba, who directed. You'll see his name on a lot of the Warner Brothers animated stuff as a director of animation. But he's also an excellent artist, and he does
Okay.
artwork right there at the booth.
Oh,
So,
that's cool.
so if you see him or me or both of us at a convention near you, do drop in. It's fun to meet people. For me too. I enjoy talking to fans and seeing how they got interested in the material as well. The book is illustrated by Dan.
Oh, neat. Okay.
Those little illustrations and the cover as well. It's a collection of essays, kind of memoirs. It's not in any chronological order, so you can dip in and dip out whenever you want to. It's mostly about writing, I think. I have to add, I think, because some of the chapters talk about how I got interested in superheroes in the first place, and what drew me to that genre. It's about the development of a writer, but not just me. Towards the end, there's some fairly dark stuff about one guy who was a film student who never got into the business. I mean, they warned us in film school, maybe 1 in 10 of you will actually make a living at it. So I wanted to follow what happened to one guy that I knew who didn't get in. And then at the very end, there's a chapter about a guy who had a very, very successful career. And by the end of it was anxiety ridden and really one of the worst people I've ever met.
Oh boy.
So there's a lot of variation in it, a lot of different stories. And if you do happen to buy the book and start reading a chapter you don't like, just switch to the next one because it'll be completely different. It's by no means an autobiography.
One of the things that I appreciate about it was that I mentioned the fact that I could jump around, but I appreciated the candor of the writing. And it was kind of funny to me because in just a couple conversations you and I had leading up to this point, I very much felt like I saw your personality in the writing style, and
Mhm.
because you were talking about you, and you weren't talking about different characters or different things. You were talking about you and your own emotions, your own feelings on things. And for me, I always get concerned when I read a book that's kind of like this, like these memoir style books, because I always feel like sometimes people write those to kind of prop themselves up in a certain light. And I didn't get that feeling from this book at all. I got the feeling that this was just a very open, honest, this is what I did, this is how it happened, and this is how I feel about it.
Well, that's good because my wife suggested an alternate title, which would have been "Everybody's Stupid Except Me." And luckily I didn't use that.
I
Maybe
don't know. I can.
no. I mean, part of it. The T.J. Hooker chapter. The person who's telling the story is kind of sitting back, watching, really like watching an accident happen, a slow motion accident where, you can see that the two cars approaching each other, and it's just kind of, watching, that knowing that it's going to turn out badly,
Right. Yeah.
and not doing anything to correct it. So yeah, there is that feeling in some of the book as I reread it. I'm glad that you didn't have that feeling. Someone else said that it kind of read as if I was sitting there talking to them, which
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like.
that is just not the way it happened. I mean, you can hear from talking to me right now, the haltingness, the groping for words, that kind of stuff. It took a lot of work on my part to make it seem more polished. But, I've had experience writing a lot of dialogue, so for many years, so it wasn't all that hard to make myself sound more articulate.
No, I thought you did a really good job of getting the point across, even in instances where you were talking about other people in perhaps less than favorable light.
Right.
I thought you did a really nice job of not, well, say not running them into the ground, but saying, hey, I didn't like this thing, right? It wasn't appreciative of this thing. Um, you know, so I think that's a nice quality to have, and it is very much a very easy to read book, and it did feel. I agree with your friend. It does feel like you're talking to it. Like as I'm reading it, I feel like you're talking to me.
Yeah, well, that's
Like
the
it's
experience of writing a lot of dialogue for other characters. Um,
well, it's paying off.
yeah, it should. It should.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so in chapter 4, which is a pretty interesting chapter for me. Yeah, now I got to find the name of it again because I was too far away from. There we go. Chapter 4. When all things go well, there's seldom a story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about writing for the Spider-Man animation, working for John Semper, a gentleman I'd absolutely love to have on this show. John's got a very cool background. And you also talk about a showdown of sorts between, and I'm going to probably get this name wrong, but Avi Arad and Stan Lee, in that chapter as well.
Well, I mean, it wasn't really a showdown, but Stan had gotten frustrated. We were at a story meeting with everyone who could say no to a story. So that meant the network, which is Fox Kids. That
Right.
that meant the head artist or animator. That meant Stan Lee from Marvel, and Avi Arad, who's the toy manufacturer.
Okay.
And there's only, of those 4 people, only one of them is a writer, and that was Stan Lee. And when you sit around with non-writers trying to throw a story together, it's really frustrating. John Semper and I were both in the room observing this, but God forbid they should listen to us. They were, they were trying to do a Venom story.
Okay.
Somehow, and Stan just got frustrated and stood up and said, he pointed out that there's a difference between a story and a series of events. A story has like not necessarily a moral, but it has some weight. It has some emotional weight. Whereas a series of events, which are often pitched to us by non-writers or beginning writers. I got one today from someone who said, well, let's have a big fight between Superman and Superman's helping out. There's another superhero and Superman's helping him. And then that superhero's kidnapped and he's reprogrammed by Brainiac. And then he gets in a fight with Superman at the end. Well, I haven't responded yet, but the problem is there is no story there yet. The writer, the young writer who's starting that, has to figure out what the emotional stakes are, why
Sure.
why people are doing things, and what's at stake for them. I remember on another show, I'd get a pitch. Superman fights a werewolf. Okay, but why? You know, where is the story in that? It's a big fight, but nothing else.
Right.
So I think Stan had that frustration within him because his stories always had weight. I mean, he understood that a story should have some kind of emotional content to it
Hmm.
as well. And what he was watching was, oh, and then we'll put in, Rhino will come in, and then we'll land on the bridge, and and like, okay, fine, but what's the emotional basis for this? So I think he got very frustrated and finally spoke up. I don't know that it changed anybody's mind, you know,
Right.
but I'm glad he did. I was very proud of him for doing that. Usually in story meetings, he acted like any other writer. If he had an idea that was good, he would speak, he would say it. But if you had an idea that he thought was good, he would say, "Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do it." Um, not he. You'd expect him to have a huge ego, but he didn't. He fit in. He would fit in well with any writer's room. I felt
That's great. Yeah.
that's a
Every
compliment. That's a compliment. I mean that as a compliment.
No, I believe that because I've heard that saying about Stan, and I never had the opportunity to meet Stan Lee, but every time I've heard somebody talk about him and working with him, it was always about how he was one of the meekest men in the room, very easy, to work with, but he also had a line that he didn't want his characters to go past, and he was very staunch for that line. And I thought that that was a nice way to talk about him, is that he very much believed in what he had created and what it was being put forth and why, but at the same time was willing to hear other people's ideas and how to develop those characters and how to make them better. And I've always thought that was really neat.
Well, in the anecdote that I just told, that line was he wanted the stories to make emotional sense. He didn't want them to just be, oh, big fight, then there's a big fight, then he meets another, then he has another fight, then
Right. Yeah.
he wouldn't tolerate that.
Oh, that's
I
cool.
mean, John Semper and I both knew that, but the other guys at the meeting, they had never had had experience creating stories from the ground up,
Sure.
and as a
Yeah.
result, it's kind of painful to watch them uh, trying to do it, and extremely time consuming. Really, really time consuming to watch this. And plus, even at that point, what would happen with the scripts was that everybody would give notes, and often one set of notes would obliterate the next set of notes, and then the person whose notes were obliterated would come back and ask that their stuff be reinstated in the script. So there's a circular quality to the rewriting process that was
Right. Yeah.
really, it was frustrating even to me, and I was just a staff writer at that point. So
I
much,
can.
so much to the point where I took Stan aside and said, "Stan, I'm stealing from you. I do one set of notes, then I do somebody else's, then I put back in the notes. I'm writing in a circle here. You're paying me to, you know, you're paying me to just keep repeating myself." And with his fatherly advice, he said, "Don't worry about it." I got one sentence. "Don't worry about it." I go, okay, fine. I'll just keep doing it.
Okay. I want to point out too that you mentioned in the book, you talked about the difference between the way that DC and Marvel wrote at that time, saying that you felt that DC at the time of the Silver Age had interchangeable word bubbles over characters' heads, um, but Marvel had more substance to their stories. Now, I found that interesting because I always felt that DC had great characters, but at least for me, Marvel had more identifiable stories, more something that I was more invested in. But that was in the 90s and into the early 2000s, except for when it came to animation. I thought DC was just heads and tails above Marvel's animation for the longest time. So why did DC shine so well in animation but lack in comic books?
I'm not sure I completely agree with your analyses. First of all, my
Well, that's
comic
fine.
my comic book reading was in late 50s, early 60s. At that point, they were trying to create, I think at DC, and it was only DC. At that point, DC was trying specifically to write for children, and by doing that, they had to create a standard good guy, and that standard good guy was personality of Batman, Superman,
Mm-hmm.
Green Arrow, Hawkman, Flash, all of them, they were simply good people, and there was no real characterization beyond that. The Dark Knight Batman didn't show up until many, many years later. So
Right. Yeah.
the reason I felt that they could change the word bubbles is that they all had the same personality. They were good people who wanted to help other people. Beyond
Mm-hmm.
that, I didn't see any. I didn't see any differentiation between the two, between any of those characters at DC at all.
Okay.
And that was a problem for me. I mean, it works for children. It works great for children because children are being given examples of of good people. This is what a good person does. Just when I was starting on Spider-Man, which was my first animation, um, I talked to an older writer who was in his 80s at that point, who had written serials. You ever seen a serial?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm not sure which ones he worked on. He might have worked on Flash Gordon. But anyway, he said, my kids, his kids were the same age as me, which would have been early 40s. He said, my kids think my stuff was corny, but what we were doing with those movies was trying to show children how to behave. The good guy doesn't shoot you in the back. The
Right.
good guy, he once he beats you up, he doesn't just keep pounding on you. He doesn't try to kill you. I mean, he was trying. His point was he was trying to show children how to behave, and that I think was the point of the DC comics that I was reading back in the
Okay.
50s and early 60s. Spider-Man, when Stan Lee started, when he had his midlife crisis and created all that new stuff, or new then, I think he was designing it for an older audience. Like instead of pre-adolescents, adolescents.
Yeah.
Uh, kids could, college students could read Marvel books, and no one would laugh at them for that. Whereas DC seemed kind of childish. But and now I need to jump ahead for a minute. In terms of success, when I was working for John Semper at Spider-Man, he pointed out that yes, the the Batman animated got the Emmy Awards, but the ratings were at Marvel.
Okay.
Spider-Man and X-Men ruled Saturday mornings. Um, I I had no idea how ratings worked in with the children's market.
Mm-hmm.
But I look and I'd go, God, there's nothing on Saturday morning that comes even close to Spider-Man, with the lone exception of X-Men, which is also on the
Right.
same network. Everything else was just completely left in the dust. Part of
Yes.
that, part of the reason for that is that the the Marvel stuff that I worked on was serialized, sort of. Um, there'd be like a little bit at the end of one episode that hinted at what would be happening at the next episode, which would draw kids in every week. The
Mm-hmm.
Batman stuff over at Warner's, I had yet to join them at that point. The Batman stuff was completely anthological. Every episode could stand on its own, and the problem with it's wonderful for writers. Writers enjoy the anthological thing more than the serial, I think.
Okay.
But if you want to draw a big audience, do the serialized thing. The anthology stuff is enjoyable because for a guy like me, it allowed me to do even within Batman, it allowed me to do film noir. It allowed me to do screwball comedy. There's a Catwoman episode, Calls of the Cat, that's just pure screwball comedy. The late Mr. Kent was film noir. There's a story called April Moon that I wrote for Batman Beyond that is straight out of EC Comics, if you remember those
Mm-hmm.
old things. So you could do that. The problem, ratings wise, is that if a little kid sees one episode and they don't like it, they're done with it. They're done with the show. So as a result, the ratings on for the Warner Brothers stuff was not they weren't as good as the ratings for the for Spider-Man or X-Men. but the quality, most people remember the very fondly. And believe me, I go to conventions, and there are people who remember those things after 30 years. They
Oh, for
remember,
sure.
like,
Yeah.
they remember stuff that I've written better than I remember it, and more clearly. So
Okay.
there's the difference: serialization versus anthology.
That
Pick
makes sense, actually.
pick one. You want high ratings? Go with serialization. You want those Emmy awards? Go with anthology.
Okay. All right, let's change direction just a little bit. Another topic in your book, but perhaps a little more deep of a topic. Chapter 8 in your book is entitled Racism and Me.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah.
That
But
by the way, that's one chapter that I asked Dan not to illustrate. There's no illustration for it.
I did actually notice that. I
Yeah.
was surprised that there wasn't anything like, because almost all of these at the end of the chapter, there's a little picture or
Yep.
something, and there
Yep.
was just nothing. I thought that was interesting, but now I know why.
Well,
On page,
it's a delicate area.
oh, for sure. I want to ask you about one particular paragraph in this, and I'm going to read it word for word, and then maybe yeah, we can talk about it in a minute. It says, but sitting in that screening room with our friend's denial of humanity remark echoing in my mind, I began to wonder if racism might not just be a kink, but rather a symptom of a more generalized disorder. I asked myself if someone who denies the humanity of minorities is likely to also be the kind of person who denies everyone else's humanity.
Yeah.
And that paragraph jumped off the page at me. I mean, it was one of those things, but as I read it, I was like, oh wow, this is a deep chapter anyway, but that's a particularly deep paragraph because you're talking about the entirety of this person, and that if they weren't willing to give this character their own version of humanity, how does that translate to everything else?
To the way they treated other human beings in life. But
Yeah.
bear in mind, the reason I wrote that wasn't quite as deep as you think. It was that the guy that I was talking about, the one who was denying the humanity of, of various races, didn't pay anybody. He didn't pay his bills. He didn't pay, he owed me. He died owing me $50,000. So I wasn't terribly happy with him. But
No, I can imagine not.
I'm sure he had friends who liked him. But it's just poisonous to art or entertainment if you think in terms of stereotypes and human beings. It's just the
Yeah,
writing. You can't be a good writer and think stereotypically. You have to
I would think not.
purge every single racial, ethnic, sexual stereotype from your mind. Otherwise, your writing's just going to be terrible.
I liked the point in the chapter where you were talking with your friend about the difference even inside of the Latino community, that in Miami it would have to be presented this way, in
Yeah.
maybe New York it would have to be presented this way, LA would have to be presented that way, because these three separate communities, all Latina, have different viewpoints and feelings about how their community is represented.
Well, that's a delicate way of putting it. I remember when I was a kid at the Olympic Auditorium in LA is where they had boxing matches, and there was a riot, and I read about it in the newspaper, and the riot seemed to me, as a 15-year-old, between Mexicans and other Mexicans. But then it had to be explained to me that one group were indeed Mexicans, people who had been born in Mexico and had come up here, and
Mm-hmm.
the other half were Chicanos, who people of Mexican descent, who were born after generations born in Los Angeles. And one fighter was Chicano and the other one was from Mexico, and that's what started I guess it was a poor decision or something, and that's what started the
Okay.
fight at the auditorium. So, you know, living in LA, one gradually becomes aware of the distinctions between the different ethnicities, and that, I mean, there's some people in America who think that everyone from Tijuana to Tierra del Fuego is a Mexican. I mean, they think with that broad of a brush.
This is true.
Where, whereas it's a much more nuanced version. I mean, it's a far more nuanced world than that. And as I said,
Mhm.
you can't think stereotypically and still be a good artist, I don't think. But the other
No,
thing
I would agree with you.
yeah, yeah. Um, it was just awful to see, just to sit in the screening room, just sit in the screening room watching that. I mean, even, and I'm not just simply talking about people from, the Spanish speaking world. There was a priest. They happened to have a priest in the neighborhood. The young priest, where's he from? Ireland. Like, Jesus, God, you know, Barry Fitzgerald wasn't available, I guess, but um,
Yeah.
I,
How did you? Oh boy, how did you say it in the book? You're talking about the list of all these different
yeah,
uh different horribly done accents, and
yeah.
it just made me laugh. Yeah, I'd have to find it again, but
Well, if you were
um
the first time and if your name was on it, you wouldn't be laughing.
no, I
My wife was laughing at it. She was watching the rape scene, and it was so poorly done. She was laughing at it.
yeah, I caught that in the book too. But the Larry Curly and Moe comment, yeah. So,
Yeah,
um, but yeah, there's a lot of really interesting behind the scenes stuff in this book that I think a lot of people will really enjoy because it's given from a firsthand perspective, and I think that makes it a little more interesting. So, clearly, that isn't one of the high points of your career,
no, no.
uh, but it clearly affected you and your writing moving forward. But what's a project in your career that you would love for people to know more about? Perhaps a hidden gem, so to speak.
I'm not sure if it's hidden, but one thing that turned out really well was Justice League New Frontier, because it's an origin story of, of the Justice League set in the Silver Age, which was, for lack of a better word, my own introduction to the comic
Hmm.
world. So I kind of knew it pretty well, and the artwork's beautiful. It came
Love
it
New Frontier.
oh good. It came out really well, I thought.
Oh
Um,
yeah, it's done
there's
very
another
well.
one. There's another one called Batman Superman Public Enemies, which is an adaptation of Jeff Loeb's series of
Hmm.
books, and that one has a real political tinge to it. And
Hmm.
it's fun to put superheroes into the political world. Although it's basically one big fight, but there's politics at the beginning, and we have Lex Luthor as the president of the United States going slowly crazy because he's a drug addict, for lack of a better description. So
Okay.
those two are a lot of fun.
Okay. I've
Um,
actually watched both of those and I enjoyed them both. So.
there's other stuff. We worked on a series called The 99, which
Hmm.
was conceived by a man named Naif Al-Matawa, based on his comic books, and
Okay.
that whole series. There's 50 episodes, and it's basically a group of international superheroes. Nothing more than that, but because of Naif's Middle Eastern origins, it was attacked quite savagely by the New York Post, and as a result,
Uh,
it never got a an American release. It is available, I think, on Facebook. I'm not sure, but I just talked to a new friend in Egypt who was just looking at it. And he said, "Yeah, this is pretty good. It turned out okay." So I'm glad that at least some people, it's still available, and that some people are enjoying it. So yeah,
okay.
hidden gem. The writers, some of the writers did their really excellent work on it, and the fact that no one or very few people got to see it is kind of a disappointment for me.
Okay. I'm gonna look up that one. That sounds interesting.
Okay,
All right. Suggestion time.
okay.
What's a book that you're reading that everyone else should know about?
I'm It's a book I'm going to read. And I don't remember the title. It's it was reviewed in this week's New Yorker, and I'm
Okay.
going to get it. The review is just a glowing thing, and it's about the desire of it's set around 1900. It is a nonfiction book about the desire to bring refugees from Eastern Europe, Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe, to Galveston, Texas, and have them not colonized, but to have them live in the Western United States.
Okay.
It's just a glowing review. If I might, I could get up right now and go to the magazine and tell you the title of it.
Sure.
Shall I? Would you like to see
Sure.
you see my house as we go? Okay. So follow me. Don't lose me. Let's not lose our Wi-Fi connection here. Okay. It's always fun to give an author a plug.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we get a nice tour with Stan, so it's fine.
small section of the house. The author of the review is Catherine Schulz, and the author of the book is called her name is Rachel Cockerell, and the book is called Melting Point, and it's by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux Publishers. So it's about an experiment to settle Jews from Russia in the American Southwest.
Interesting. Okay.
Starting in Galveston, and the way it's described is that it's not really it's not a fictional thing. It's not a nonfiction thing. It's the author uses only interviews from contemporary sources. Going back to 1890, 1900. Okay. So I need that book.
Sounds interesting.
It does.
Okay. It's time for what we call our silly question, Stan. And the basis of this is that my co-host Kathleen, who wasn't able to be here today, her and her daughter were out and about in town, and somebody asked her daughter this question, but not Kathleen. And Kathleen thought, well, there's never a time that you should ever grow out of being asked this question.
Okay.
It should always be able to be asked. So, Stanley Berkowitz, what's your favorite dinosaur?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is the Tyrannosaurus.
Okay.
I had an idea for a story where they are the ones. They were the alpha predators, right?
Oh yeah.
And that they would have been God's chosen people. They're even developing little hands so they could do tools and stuff. but when God said to them, "Okay, here are my rules for being my chosen people," when he recites a long list, and when he gets to circumcision, the dinosaurs all rebel and say, "No, we're not going to do that." So God gets gets pissed off, and he hurls a giant comet at Earth. And so much for the dinosaurs.
Nice.
Aren't you glad you asked that?
I am, actually. I love it.
Did you think the answer was sillier than the question?
I love the fact that we got a silly answer to a silly question. It's good times. All right, Stan, I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show today. Where can our listeners go to find out more about you, your work, anything you've got coming up?
Facebook page, and I'll talk about convention appearances there on that page. And the book is available only on Amazon, or if you happen to personally meet me at a convention. Oh, actually, Heroic Fine Arts, if you go there, you can also buy books through them, and they'll be autographed.
Okay.
The ones from Amazon are not, and you can also get a digital version for Kindle at Amazon. Okay.
Perfect. I'll make sure that we put some links down in our show notes down below so people can have a chance to check that out. And the book definitely gets my stamp of approval. It's been a lot of fun to read. So encourage everyone to check it out. Now, guys, if you're not already, this is a perfect time to remind you that following our show on YouTube is not only free, but also the most important thing you can do to ensure that we get more amazing guests like Stan Berkowitz here today. And so that he can enjoy us and have fun with us as well. So please consider following our show. It helps out more than you will ever know. And be sure to check out Stan's work as well. So until then, Guys, thank you for listening and paying attention to the show. Stan, thank you for being here today. And may the force be with you as you continue to live long and prosper. Goodbye.
Copyright 2025 FSF Podcast. Reference any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF Podcast. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpodcast.com.